So, welcome everybody to April's webinar. So the topics today are going to be quality assurance. And also, I don't want to say brief check-ins because it's actually quite a bit of check-ins. So kind of some extensive check-ins. And I'm going to go ahead and start with that material first, since Matt is tied up talking about his role. We have just for those of you off site, we've got a tour that is coming through the office right now, and Matt is talking to them right now. So we'll let him go second, and I'm going to just go ahead and jump right in to some check-ins that we have. And the first topic on my check-in agenda is Tier 2 escalations. So I spoke with all of the Tier 2 specialists about like what some issues that they were having with certain escalations, I guess you could say. And so I wanted to start out by just reminding everybody, when you're escalating to any of our Tier 2 programs, don't forget to save a referral in Refer to the Tier 2 program. So for coordinated access, that means you're going to use the Taxonomy Emergency Shelter Clearinghouse to save a referral to coordinated access. For Med Refer, you are going to use prescription drug patient assistance programs. For fatherhood, you're going to use fatherhood supportive service referrals. And for help to veterans, you will use veteran/active military support service referrals. So I want to touch on just briefly on each of these programs. So I spoke to Marty about fatherhood stuff and some stuff that he was seeing there, and he wanted me to remind everybody to make sure that you are having a conversation with the father and giving him some referrals to get him started. When the call is escalated, that caller might end up getting a voicemail and may have to wait for a fatherhood specialist to call back. And so, you know, Marty is only here part-time. Tim has a lot of meetings and events that he's going to outside of the office. So oftentimes you're going to transfer somebody to the fatherhood line and nobody's going to be there to talk to them immediately. Well, we, as generalists, have access to a lot of the same information that they're going to have. So don't be afraid to go ahead and look for places that are going to help somebody with custody issues or child support or employment or anger management or whatever it is that they need. Provide them with some initial referrals, and then after you've helped them as much as you're able to help them, then that's when you want to escalate that to the fatherhood line. And then if Marty or Tim are not available to take a call immediately, when they do return that call, they'll be able to check and see if those initial referrals that you gave them, if it worked out, and if not, then they can explore some other avenues for them. Yeah. Okay, now with MedRefer, hey, I just want to, hey everybody, can you make sure that you're all on mute, because I'm hearing some background noise. So just please make sure you're muted. Thank you. Okay, now for MedRefer, don't forget that MedRefer no longer provides healthcare advocacy or help with understanding health insurance options. It is specifically for prescription medication assistance. And then just to add, there was something else that I wanted to add about that. MedRefer doesn't pay for prescriptions. So we don't have like this big pot of money where we're just paying for people's prescriptions. MedRefer links people to prescription expense assistance. So I just wanted to make sure that you're all aware of that distinction, because we don't want to I know Matt said that he has overheard some folks that were really kind of misrepresenting what MedRefer is able to do. So it's not like Christy's sitting there with this big pot of money saying, okay, I'm going to pay for all your drugs. She is trying to see if the the prescriptions that the person takes, if the drug manufacturer offers them for free or at a reduced cost, or if there's any coupons, or if there's any other way for that person to get their prescriptions either free or at a lower cost. But she's not actually paying for them out of a pot of money that we have here. Okay, help to veterans. Tim asked that I remind everybody to please save your incompletes before cold transferring the call. This is actually important for all of the Tier 2 programs. And reason for that is because so that when you cold transfer that call over to the Tier 2 program, they're waiting for that incomplete to be presented to them in refer. And if it doesn't come up right away, then they just have to go through everything that you just went through with that caller. So they're going to ask them their zip code, their age, like if they're a veteran, like all of that demographic stuff, and the person then has to re-explain their whole situation. And it gets frustrating sometimes for that caller that says, you know, gee, I just told my whole story to the first person and now I got to retell it. So make sure you save that incomplete first and put a little bit of detail in those incomplete notes. And then that way when the person is it reaches the Tier 2 specialist, that specialist has a little bit of understanding of the person's situation from the beginning. And so then they can just clarify and do some probing if they have some more questions for them. If your caller is not a veteran, but they're calling on behalf of a veteran, put that somewhere in the incomplete notes. What's happened is Tim's had a few people, a few cases escalated to him where and actually, go ahead, do this, where in this incomplete section, they put the veteran's name here and then the contact person's phone number here, where the contact person is not the same person as the veteran. It might be a family member or a social worker or something. So then he's calling this contact number and asking for the veteran, but that's not the veteran's phone number. So just make sure that you're clear about all that in the incomplete notes, so that Tim or whatever Tier 2 program it is understanding what's happening and who to contact. Tim also wanted me to let everybody know that there were some issues with mobile crisis transferring veterans to the National VA Crisis Line. And so there have been some complaints about that because, mobile crisis was, their reasoning was that a veteran in crisis who's feeling suicidal wants to speak with another vet. And, that might be the case, but, when someone's suicidal, sometimes time is of the essence. And so that whole process has been changed and the issue's been resolved. So if you have any veterans complaining about service with, getting delayed assistance through mobile crisis, they've resolved all that. So things should be going smoothly again. Now, coordinated access. This is actually not exactly a brief check-in. It's a little bit more extensive. I spoke with Nikki and about how things were going with coordinated access, and she had some things that she wanted me to talk about today. First, don't forget to fully fill out the form on the data page for all first-time callers. So you have to ask every question in that screening. And then if somebody is calling to do a status check, you want to fill out the data page up until the part where it says, stop here if the client is checking status. So make sure that you ask all of those questions up until you get to that point that is telling you to stop. Don't forget to save the incomplete to Nikki. If you don't select her name, and just with any of the Tier 2 programs, if you don't select the Tier 2 specialist's name, that incomplete is going to be saved to you. And if you don't recognize that or see that right away, that's going to cause a delay in service for that individual. Also, Nikki said that it would be helpful if there were some details in that incomplete note. So some things that she mentioned would be helpful for her would be if this call is just a status check, does this individual or family have a place to stay for tonight? Is the phone number that they left just a message phone? Like, for example, if they don't have a phone and that phone number is for their caseworker or for another agency or a family member, please notate that in the incomplete notes. And then, of course, any other detail that that upon conversation with that person that you feel is going to be critical for the CA staff to make placement for that person. Okay. We really need to be doing a better job of diversion with our Toledo shelter callers. The waiting lists are very, 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 very long to get into shelters. And like, for example, there are only 7 female beds. So 7, that's it. And they've got well over 250 people that are on that waiting list right now. So really, diversion is incredibly important here because, you know, the reality is that that it's going to take a very long time for a single female to get into a shelter. So some suggested language around that. Do you have a plan for tonight? Or if you don't get into shelter tonight, where will you go? Okay.
Molly?
Yes.
This is Allison. I have a quick question for you about the diversion for the shelters. So for Lucas County, one of the issues we've been running into is with the Cherry Street Mission and the Sparrow's Nest. A lot of the times when we attempt to divert to those shelters, individuals are specifically asking for St. Paul's, which is a part of CA, or there's issues going on at either the Sparrow's Nest or the rescue mission or other shelters that they can access independently that is causing or adding to that delay. So my question is there anything being done about the lack of assistance from the other optional shelters there in Lucas County to help with that overflow?
Well, you know, individuals can certainly go to those shelters. I mean, it's just been my experience that that clients will often have a preference of where they want to go, but you know, sometimes it can be unavoidable because if there's, you know, a waiting list that has 250 people in front of them, you know, that they may just have to stay there temporarily if they don't have anywhere else to go. So, you know, certainly I would definitely offer those options for those other shelters. I know that it's often not the client's first choice, but, you know, that's just kind of the reality. That the waiting lists are really long. So if they're unhappy at one of those other shelters that work outside of coordinated access and they're on a waiting list, then, you know, just talk to them to see if they have any other resource that they can reach out to, friend, family member, anything as some place that they can stay. Because there's just nowhere near as many beds as what they need in Lucas County. Okay, so
I have a question real quick, Molly. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
So I'm having a lot of callers that are calling daily, and they are saying that they were told to call daily to check the status. And is that so? I don't know that that's true.
I don't know, Nikki. Are you on? Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. So we tell them that, you know, they don't have to call every day because the process used to be that they did call every day at these certain bed count times, but that's not the case anymore. Some people just feel more comfortable calling every day and checking in. And so we do say, you know, if you ever want to check the status, feel free to call. Like I have a guy right now who just feels better calling every day. And so sometimes people are just going to call, whether it's force of habit or it makes them feel, like they're in touch with us. But it's still the same. They don't have to call in unless something changes, like their phone number.
Right.
But that's not a requirement. But I think it's more some people just feel like they're more in touch with us, and I understand that.
Now, can we tell them that there are only 7 beds and the waiting list is a mile long?
I would kind of just direct them to us. You can say like that shelter placement's not immediate. You know what I mean? And then we kind of let them know, like, it might take some time. But I would just kind of direct them to us.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about any specifics of the process. Allow Nikki and Sandra to deal with that, but certainly I would let the caller know that generally there are always waiting lists to get into shelter, and so that's a good opportunity for you to start asking some of those probing questions, like, okay, well, there usually is a waiting list to get in, so if you don't get into shelter tonight, what are you going to do? And to see, like, if they have anybody that they're able to reach out to, that they couldn't, stay with for the short term while they're on this waiting list.
Okay. I have a question about that. The things that I run into when I tell people that is, I don't know, I'm calling you. That's why I'm calling you, because I don't have anybody else. I don't have anywhere else to go. What am I supposed to do?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I would just notate that in the incomplete, so that Nikki and Sandra can address that. And it's important for us to try to divert, but not everybody is going to be able to be diverted. So actually that leads right into kind of my next slide here. When you can't divert, if it's after 4:30 p.m. on a weekday, or if it's a weekend or a holiday, and the caller has children with them, call the supervisor line and put this in the incomplete notes. So specifically, I'm talking about after 4:30 on a weekday, or if it's a weekend or holiday. So we're talking after hours here, and only call the supervisor in this circumstance if the person has children with them. So that's the policy. When you do this, don't promise the caller placement, but let them know that you're contacting a supervisor, and they can expect a call back to see if arrangements are possible. So Nikki and Sandra are going to do their best to see if there's any way that they can accommodate, but we can't make any sort of promises. And from this point forward, your involvement with the call is really handed over. So at this point, don't worry about what happens next. That's for Nikki and Sandra to take care of from there. Okay. More coordinated access stuff. So this is new. Beds are no longer going to be held for 2 hours. So this is really important. This is a new change. What had been happening is when someone would get to the top of the waiting list and a bed would become available, Nikki and Sandra would reach out to that person, and then they would keep trying to reach them for 2 hours. And then if they couldn't get a hold of that person, then they'd get the next person on the list, and they'd be trying that person for 2 hours, and then they'd go to the next person on the list. And so sometimes, especially because, these waiting lists are so long, a lot of times by the time Nikki and Sandra are calling them back, they've already made other arrangements. So something has already changed in their world and they no longer need shelter. So it could be a really long process if they're holding those beds for 2 hours each time they make a phone call. So, unfortunately, we've had to get rid of that process. So there have been some changes in refer. That piece of it has been taken out. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware that we're not holding beds anymore. If it's a domestic violence situation, don't forget to refer the caller to the YWCA that provides domestic violence services in Lucas County. And then also make sure with these callers that you are providing any other additional housing referrals that you can possibly do. So like, for example, some taxonomy terms that you may find helpful. Home rental listings, public housing, low income subsidized private housing, rent payment assistance. Now, of course, with any sort of income-based housing, there's waiting lists, but if they haven't already gotten on those lists, then they really need to, pursue that unless they expect that they're going to have some sort of dramatic increase in their income in the relatively near future.
Molly, could I ask a question? Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
With regard to the, if it's a domestic violence situation, it's been my experience when I do transfer to the DV line as well as the YWCA, and hopefully it's the right county and not anything besides Lucas County. But there is a staff person that I don't know if that's just a shift that they work, but when I do that for Lucas County, the person tells me that there's nothing that they can do. And this is the DV line, and you've got somebody who's in an active situation, and the response is, well, there's, we can't get her, into a shelter. There's nothing, that we can do. See if she can find a friend or something. And this is what they're telling me, so I don't even get to transfer the person, thankfully, because that could be traumatic enough, in addition to what they're already going through, to have somebody who's supposed to help you say, well, there's nothing, that we can do, type of thing. We're not going to get you into a shelter. So I say all that to say that, one, that's a response that at least I'm receiving, and I don't know if that's a response that callers may be receiving if they're transferred, over. But then what, besides then YWCA with DV, what other options do we have, for that person who might need, that immediate safety factor?
Okay. Well, what I would say in regards to that, you can still do a intake for them, that initial pre-screening for shelter placement. I would make sure that you put something somewhere in the incomplete notes that the caller was referred back by the YWCA, so that Nikki and Sandra are aware of the situation, and put a notation in there that it's a domestic violence call. Nikki, is there anything beyond that that staff should know for doing those referrals?
Yeah, we'll definitely, like you said, we'll definitely still we'll still assist them regardless. And the other thing is, they can also, if it's possible, and I know it's not always possible, but if it is, they can always walk into the YWCA and do a safety assessment. Sometimes they don't like to give out bed availability over the phone, and they have to do a safety assessment. So that is something to consider as well. There's domestic violence like intervention, but as far as like the immediate need, and as always, if it's after hours and they have kids, even if it's domestic violence and they don't have anywhere to go and the Y can't help, still call the supervisor line. That's about the best I can tell you. We will try to call them back for sure that day if it's domestic violence, as long as it's a weekday.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Nikki. Okay. So moving.
This is Louise. Molly, I just wanted to mention something, because we've had that situation in Cuyahoga County where the domestic violence hotline sort of didn't pick up the piece about safety planning that they're supposed to do. They sort of just thought all you wanted to do was get them there for shelter. So I think it might be useful to send a transmittal about the YWCA and communicate to the YWCA that that was the experience you had. Because a lot of times the agency wants to know that their staff is not doing the safety planning, that they're focusing on the shelter situation instead. So that's just a thought that I would have about that. Okay. So I'd just say send a transmittal maybe to Martha to just check with the YWCA. If they're supposed to be doing safety planning, their staff might want to know that that didn't happen on the call.
Okay. Thanks, Louise. Okay, so next topic is problem gambling and QPR. So some of us went to a training not too long ago that was coordinated by Recovery Resources on QPR, which that stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer. And this is, kind of think of it as like a first aid, I guess, if you will, for those that are feeling suicidal. And so this particular seminar was QPR as it relates to the problem gambler. And Chris and Aaron are going to be reaching out to all of those who did not attend that training in person and be reviewing this material in small groups. So look forward in the somewhat near future to be hearing from either Chris or Aaron about going over some of that information. Now, some of you had responded to me and said that you were interested in taking the QPR webinar. And you can expect an email from me probably like sometime early next week or within the next week on how to, instructions on how to log in and take that. I just wanted to remind everybody, lethality assessments are required for all problem gambling calls. And let me repeat that because it is extremely important. Lethality assessments are required for all of our problem gambling calls. This is part of our contract. So our funders want us to be asking every problem gambler caller or someone who's calling on behalf of someone who is a problem gambler to ask that question. So here we are. I did a screenshot out of Refer. So we have a contact data form about lethality assessments. And actually, earlier today, Matt Finley just made this assessment a requirement in order to exit the call. So you're not going to be able to close out any of your problem gambling calls unless you go through this assessment and fill it out.
Well, if it's a sorry, Molly, I added a question to those so that if it is just like an informational call about the lottery or casino, the first question now is a yes/no as to whether or not it involves problem gambling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you don't have to.
So
ask
if it doesn't, you can do no and then save it, and then as long as the form is filled out, you're cool.
Yeah, so don't worry about asking somebody that's calling about what's on the buffet if they're feeling suicidal. You don't have to do that. But, I understand that it can be a little awkward or intimidating to talk about suicide if it's something that, you're not used to doing or you haven't done before. And so, I think that this is worded really nicely. So you're not stumbling over the words. You can just kind of read this as it's written in here. Now, there's not like a specific time during the call that you're required to ask this. It just has to happen some point during the call. But for me, I find that it tends to flow well. When I'm in Refer, and actually let me get out of this. Now, when I get a problem gambling call, the very first thing that I do is I head on over to the data page, and I use these contact data questions to get the conversation started. And you don't want to ask these as if it's like you're grilling them, but I think it's a good way to start that conversation and to get them talking. So I usually like to start by asking them, did something just happen that is prompting you to call us right now? And then through the course of the conversation, they're telling me a little bit about like what's going on in their world and how it's affecting them and why they want to get help. So this is a good transition from that point, I feel, into this lethality assessment, because they've just finished telling me all about how I lost all my money and my husband's going to divorce me and I'm probably going to lose my job and my credit cards are maxed out and I've got a foreclosure notice. And so like all of these things. So this is a good transition to say, like, it sounds like, this is incredibly stressful for you. And sometimes when people are stressed, they feel, or when they're feeling down, they think about suicide. Have you ever thought about suicide? And, generally, if that is not something that a person's ever thought about or considered, they're going to kind of be, a little surprised by that. Oh, well, no, I don't. I haven't thought about suicide, or that's not something that is an issue for me. And it'll be a pretty convincing, like, no. But if that's not the case, then we're going to continue on with these questions. So, are you currently thinking about suicide? Do you have a specific plan? And then do you have the means to carry out that plan? And then if so, have they initiated that plan? Are they about to initiate it? Or are they not immediately implementing the plan, or suicidal ideation only? So, based on people's answers to these questions, we're going to, we don't want to just ask this question and leave it. We want to take that to offer them some additional referrals. Someone in the last session asked, okay, so if they're thinking about suicide, we're just supposed to immediately transfer them to the suicide hotline? Not necessarily. It depends on the caller's state of mind. So if the caller is relaying to me, well, sometimes I think about it, I don't really have a plan. I don't have the means to carry it out right now. I really just want to get help for my gambling problem. Then, go ahead and give them some referrals to help them get started with getting some help for their addiction. But then as you get towards the end of the call, make sure that you offer them information about the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, or if we have a local hotline, we can provide them with that as well. If it's a more severe situation and somebody's like, yeah, I'm thinking about suicide right now and I have the means to carry it out, then we want to, initiate our normal rescue procedure. And actually, Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about what you said in the last call about accessing 911 services and the research department? Matt?
What's that? Were you asking me something?
Oh, yeah. So I was just stopping here when talking about the if somebody is planning on hurting themselves, or if they've already begun to hurt themselves, initiating the rescue procedure. And I just thought you might want to say something about accessing 911, like you did in the last webinar, and where we're at with the database on that.
Oh, yeah, we're just trying to find the best solution to include statewide resources. So some of this will just be talking to the state to figure out what they want to do in terms of whether or not we find an easy way to integrate in terms of suicide hotlines. Because the suicide hotlines by county is not a bad idea to some way incorporate, and those are easy every county has a designated one that's part of, the national system. 911s are a lot trickier. We've been talking about how we can, because that was another thing that Problem Gambling asked us about, because we make sure that we have a 911 for every area. But even in talking to like the 911 at the state level, no one seems to know exactly how many 911s there are, like how many centers there are in the state now, if they all have even 10-digit numbers that we could use, somehow include in contact. So we're just trying to figure out. We've gotten different recommendations essentially from some different statewide agencies as to how to handle it. So as we try to rewrite that 911 policy, that's another piece I know is still kind of tenuous, that is just turning out to be a lot more complicated than we thought, but we're working on it.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about the lethality assessment?
Yes, ma'am. It's Allison. My question at the bottom where it says initiate rescue procedure, would you mind going over what the exact rescue procedure is?
Well, like Matt just said, we're kind of in the process of cleaning that up. But if it's a circumstance where they need to be transferred to a hotline, we can certainly transfer them to a suicide prevention hotline. If they've actually already taken the steps to complete their plan, then in that circumstance, we are going to try to get them in touch with their local 911 service. And so there's a kind of, right now it's not, as Matt said, clean and refer, but there's a few kind of troubleshooting methods that you can use. Taxonomy, you can use the taxonomy 911. Not everything in the database right now is consistent with that. So there's some 911 numbers that will have like an alternate number way to reach them. You may also want to look up municipal police for their area and provide that telephone number. Well, not provide it, but actually dial it and explain what's happening. And then if the number listed, if this does not get you to the dispatcher, they should be able to transfer you to the 911 dispatcher or otherwise direct you as to what to do. Okay, and then for right now, I guess, hopefully we don't have this situation come up before it's all straightened out in the database. But if you did have an active suicide on the line and it was in an area that we don't cover 211 services for, then I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, that it would be okay in that circumstance to try to Google the police department for whatever city that they're in.
I just wanted to make sure we still had this in the database, because I remember adding it because of the problem gambling contract.
Okay.
If you search municipal police, one of the results, probably the bottom of your match list, I think is where it's going to show up, is a website called USA Cops. That, again, not the kind of thing we normally include, but we got permission because we were trying to figure out some way to do this, that actually lists it's a searchable website for the municipal police department. It's a nationwide directory.
Okay.
So that is what we had added. Yeah. So that's when we were first kind of discussing this issue with the state. This is the thing this was the solution I think we all had reached.
Got it. Okay. Good to know. All right. But, hopefully we'll get this squared away. I can't say that I ever remember there being an active suicide on the problem gambling line. Certainly we've had suicidal callers, but I don't recall that happening before. I could be wrong, or maybe it happened and I was not made aware of it. But those instances, either way, it's going to be few and far between. So I would imagine that we'll get this all squared away in the database before, hopefully, that actually ever occurs. Okay. Anybody have any more questions about that?
I do.
Okay.
So my question is, if you were getting let's say halfway or so through that list, the lethality assessment, and your caller disconnects the call, do you call them back, or say if they say that they have the thoughts of suicide and things like that, what do you do at that point?
Okay. People essentially lose their right to confidentiality when they make it clear that they have intent to harm themselves or someone else. So I would say in that circumstance, it's okay to call them back at that number that you have for them.
Okay.
Because it'll show on the caller ID. But otherwise, if somebody disconnects and they haven't said anything about being suicidal, we're going to respect their privacy and we're not going to call them back. So only do that if it's a case of somebody saying that they are thinking about suicide or thinking about harming someone else.
Okay, I can do that. Thank you.
All right. So moving right along here. I'm going over my allotted time here, so we're going to try to skate through these. Okay, so access sites. The STAR access site includes more than just Stark County. It includes Carroll, Coshocton, Harrison, Jefferson, and Tuscarawas. And so to help you remember that, we've made an update not we, but Matt has made an update in Refer to reflect that all of the counties that are covered in the STAR access site. So what had happened is on a few occasions, we had some secret shopper calls that were calling from some of those smaller counties that are part of our contract with Stark County United Way. And people were telling them, sorry, we don't cover your area here, call this full 10-digit number, and then they would call the full 10-digit number, and then it would ring back to us because that 10-digit number rings to us because we're the place that covers that. So in order to make it a little bit easier for everybody to remember, all of those counties are listed next to STAR now so that you won't forget. And then also a reminder that now Hancock County has their own access site. So in the past, those calls were recorded in the Lucas County, the Luca access site, but we've separated that, and now Hancock County has their own access site. So when you do have Hancock County residents call and it's presented on that Hancock County skill and in contact, make sure that you're opening up the Hancock County access site. Okay, next topic, police-assisted addiction and recovery initiatives. I just put up the taxonomy definition of that. These are programs that are established by local police departments that have made the decision to encourage individuals with an opioid use disorder to seek medical care and ongoing treatment as an alternative to arrest, prosecution, and possible prison term. Participating police departments connect individuals asking for help with treatment programs and facilities, and at the community level, help distribute opioid blocking drugs to prevent and treat overdoses and provide resources to other police departments wanting to implement such approach. Okay, so there have been a bunch of transmittals about this recently because it's been in the news, and so there's a lot of media coverage on this. This is like a nationwide initiative to help people who are addicted and want to get into detox or treatment through participating police departments. So that's a key thing. Not all police departments do this. There are only, at this point, there's only a handful that do. Most of the participating police departments are in either suburban or rural areas. So this is not something that is available in most urban or metropolitan areas. Now, this is a possible avenue to get into detox or treatment a little bit more quickly. However, the like super important big red flag that we need to let all our callers know is that if you walk into a police station to access this program, you're first going to be evaluated for outstanding warrants. So absolutely tell your callers this. It's for all of the police departments that offer this in our service area. It clearly states this in refer. This is so important because we don't want that person to get really ticked off at us by saying, hey, 211 told me to walk into the police department to get treatment, and now my situation's even worse than it was before because I had an outstanding warrant, and now I've been placed under arrest. So please make that clear to callers whenever you're talking about this program. Also, registered sex offenders and those with an arson conviction are not eligible. Okay, so when would you use this? The first and most obvious reason is because somebody asks for it. So people hear about it on the news, or they see it on TV, or someone told them about it on Facebook. They ask about it, we're going to give them the information about it. We might want to give this, provide this information if the caller is in immediate crisis and it's outside of intake hours for any sort of detox or treatment program in their area. And then also this might be something that you give in addition to other substance abuse treatment referrals. How do you find it? The taxonomy is police-assisted addiction and recovery initiatives, or you can find it using the acronym PAARI. Okay, and then I wanted to make a shout out to,
Molly?
Yes?
Sorry, Louise, just to mention one more thing about that police-assisted addiction recovery term.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a pop-up on the taxonomy that will remind people about the fact that somebody if they refer for this, someone could be will be evaluated for
active warrants.
Right. So that's going to actually be on every taxonomy, and it is listed in the individual police departments. That's where you'll see it.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's good because then hopefully nobody misses that reminder. Okay, so I wanted to welcome all of our new staff. We've had quite a few people since our last webinar. We've got a whole crew from Accountable Health Communities. We've got Ashley, Autumn, Michelle, Renee, Greg, and Sarah. Also, Jeff is going to also be joining the team on Tuesday. And then also Latoya is going to be transitioning from 211 over to the AHC department. So welcome to all of them. And then on the 211 side, we've got Stan, our new QA specialist, and you'll get to hear a little bit from him momentarily. And then we have Kyra and Dawn, who are both brand new, and more to come. We are still hiring. If you know anybody that is looking for employment, and you think that they might be a good fit for any of these positions, we've got part-time, we've got full-time, we've got accountable health positions available. So if you know any interested and qualified parties, please let them know. And if you're referring somebody, I would just make a mention to Sheree so that she can keep an eye out for those applications as they come through. And then before I toss the controls on over to Matt Finley to talk about updates with quality assurance, I'm going to take a moment to do a shameless plug for my daughter's play. Opens this weekend. Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Last night she came home from practice and said, "Mom, will you please hang up these posters at work?" And so I said, okay, I'll hang up a poster and then I will tell everybody at my webinar tomorrow. So there you go. Okay, I want to toss the controls over to Matt Finley. If you're ready to do that, Matt, is that cool?
Yeah, totally.
All right, okay, I'm gonna.
So the first thing, so I really just have two things, but they're two really exciting and important, cool things. And the first is just to, I know Molly just mentioned that we do have a new quality assurance specialist, Stan Griffin. He actually comes to us from the Site Center, where he worked in quality assurance, but also, did a lot of other work just as one of their employees in their call center prior to moving to that. But I'll give him an opportunity to introduce himself and just talk a little bit, about his kind of history with QA. And then, he's going to call in right now. I was supposed to tell him when to call in. Let me do my second thing first, because I did not tell him, hey, call in and introduce yourself, because I was just so wrapped up in that great promo for that awesome coat that there's a show about. The other thing that I wanted to review that's coming up that is exciting, that is very super, super new. I just started sharing my screen. So we are changing over to a new quality assurance software package. We're hoping from looking at it, the biggest issue with exam was the amount that we kind of had to rely on going through the middleman of exam to get changed. Really, it wasn't customizable at all. And I feel like both from, my perspective, trying to manage the QA program, and I'm sure from everyone's perspective, just logging in to look at calls, look at your scores, that you probably felt like you didn't have maybe as much visibility into not just like what each individual call of yours was scored, but like your overall performance, your performance as it compares to, other people, like the team that you're on, and I'll talk about. So let me log in and show you guys. Right now, again, we just kind of made this decision about a week ago. So this is a software that I am super new to. Todd's been using it for a little bit to do the QA for My Free Taxes. And I know I've been running the calibrations for My Free Taxes. So last week I used this for the first time to do that call calibration. But I've just started kind of setting it up for our 2-on-1. But I wanted to get it set up enough to be able to show you like the specialist interface. Whoops. So I have to log into my kind of dummy specialist account. So you can sort of see how this will look. And then if you guys have any reaction or response immediately, you can let me know. But also, like I said, I'll be working over the next couple of weeks to get people's accounts set up and then sending out some information about how to log in just so you can get familiar with it. It's super, super straightforward. And I think, again, a lot more, even more user-friendly than exam from the specialist side. Sorry, I had to think about that. Okay, that did not work because I put in the wrong password, apparently. Sorry, I'm managing like 2 different accounts on this because one is my specialist account and one is my managing stuff account. There we go. Okay, so this is like I said, the specialist interface. And I don't know, this is just the default. I don't know that we're going to be using all of these different features. So if you see something you love, definitely let me know, because you're like, oh, definitely keep that. But if you see stuff you hate, also, again, either today or once you're able to kind of log in and look around, it's kind of hard to begin with too, because we don't have any calls in there really scored yet. So over the first couple months, we want to start ramping up with doing quality assurance again in May. So as we enter calls and scores, I think we'll also get a better idea collectively what kind of is helpful and what is just sort of cluttering this interface. But I'll show you some basic stuff. I put in just a couple sample score sheets just so we could have some data here. So you can see when you first log in, well, one, it's like fun, it's customizable. You can throw up whatever picture you want for yourself. And then you can see like an overall score here that's not just based on one or two. I mean, it will be based just on one or two calls or chats, one that's the only thing in there. But as over time, you'll get to see kind of an aggregate as compared to your team. Right now, I think the teams will probably be full-time versus part-time. I still don't love that you can't do like see yours compared to a team compared to the entire center. I want to look into see if that's something that I can like add onto here, or I'm just not sure how that works, because we do have like United Way of Greater Cleveland set up as the organization, teams within that, and then employees with staff within teams. This is like a trend map. Again, we only have two. There's only two in here. This shows you that, hey, this Mart Funley is on this kind of upward trend for what it's worth. And then there's a section breakout here that again is an aggregate where you can actually see the overall percentages of each of these individual scorecards. And then by either selecting there, or I'll show you there's another way to do it. This isn't meant as like a training, by the way. This is really just to show you guys what we're looking at. And so you can see here the scorecard. And that means the same old scorecard, but this is where you would look to see. One of the things I actually like about this that I pointed out on the first training today is like exam, we had to have the same selections for every single metric, even if they're like, it would be yes, no, NA for everything, even if NA wasn't an option. With this, we're actually able to customize and only add the NA if that's a possibility. So that makes it a bit easier to look at. I want to figure out a way to get the QA guide incorporated into here. I just don't know the best way to do that yet. There's your, go ahead.
Oh, yes, yeah. It's Carol. I was thinking now on that list there, like where you have like no, what was missing like from exam before was the actual like note as to why it would be note. So what's missing would be what would be the note attached to that. It'd be nice if they had that, So what is the reason for no? Like what is the specific information then that would apply as to what is the detail? So that's what's missing is like the note. I just thought I'd run that by you.
Right. And so right now, I mean, we had never been making notes for individual metrics. Like that was never anything we had available. There were comments made for the overall that we did comments for each section. So there were section comments. But given that we only have one QA specialist, I don't think we'll be able to provide, I mean, really the purpose isn't to provide you, and I think part of the issue with exam is that its display even valued those individual contacts over, a trend. Like the idea is to find ways to provide constructive feedback, both about what overall you're really good at and what overall kind of needs work, not just, hey, on this call, you did this one thing wrong, and here, let's write a whole thing about how this one time you just made a mistake on that. I don't even find that to be like constructive. But to your broader point about having some comments displayed, that is just something we have to look at and think about. We had it in the past. We did have, before we had exam comments that displayed and got a lot of concerns from specialists about just not liking seeing the comments. And then when we had exam and didn't have comments, we got, again, a lot of feedback that people wanted to see what the supervisors and the coaches are using to coach on. So I guess at some point it's just going to get a consensus from folks of whether or not they want to see those.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, this definitely is easier here at least to show them. And then if everyone's like, oh God, I don't want to read that stuff, I'd rather just discuss it with someone, pull it out. Rather than having to wait for exam to say, hey, now can you take this away? So you can see here, like if we were using comments I did want to show, like you can display comments for this contact. And then as with exam, whoops, I went back to the dashboard by accident. As with exam, you could see at the bottom there, it's pretty easy to just, again, pull up the audio and listen to that audio file. It looks like there's a way to request like a one-to-one. I don't know. Again, I'm just learning all the functionality of this myself. So like I said, I don't know if we're necessarily going to be using all of this functionality. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a chance to see what we're looking at kind of as we're building it out. There's a way to put goals in for individuals. Again, don't know that we would necessarily use this, but you can kind of track these kind of running goals. So I just put in 2 today. Yeah, and then events is just another way to see activities. You can access your scorecards there. Again, like you can access them here. So anyway, I think it gives a lot more visibility. But I also feel like it's going to be hard to know what we really love and what we don't love until we have a little bit more. And so we start scoring calls in here. So that's really my goal, is to get Stan, I've got this set up and get Stan in here so he can start kind of scoring stuff. And that's actually a good segue to introduce Stan and let him introduce himself to you guys. He started back in February. He's been training with the Accountable Health Communities folks, just learning a bit about 2-on-1, but I'm excited because, like I said, he has a lot of experience doing quality assurance work for a help center. So, hey, Stan.
Hey, Matt. Thank you. So I am Stan Griffin. I used to work over at Cleveland Site Center. I was a part of the Site Center for maybe about six years, and so my career there started as an assistive tech trainer, working on getting folks familiar with the different adaptive technology to be able to access the computers and go to work or go to school or allow them to be independent. So eventually that transitioned over to the call center, the contact center there at the site center, and they're contracted to take several different types of calls. Secretary of State's office, Help Me Grow, Cuyahoga County Job and Family Services. So many different areas that I became familiar with and experiencing over at the site center. And so what that eventually led to was me working with the quality assurance team. And eventually, it was just me and one other person working on that team. And we really were able to collaborate together and come up with pretty good ideas in regards to quality assurance from the point of view of being a specialist on the phone, taking those calls, talking to these different individuals, and then from the side of actually pulling those calls, scoring those calls, and some of the feedback that we were giving out. So it turned out to be a really good experience. And so when I saw the position at United Way open up, that kind of just happened. It was really one of those things that it was a great opportunity, and it was something that I felt that I needed to take advantage of. So I did, and here I am, and I'm really excited about just getting involved with the team here. It's a really great team, some really great things going on, and I'm just here to support that and help us grow and do the best that we can do as a team.
Thanks, dude. So anyway, we're really excited to have Stan on the team and especially get his input, as we kind of move forward. I don't think, in terms of QA announcements, I don't have any major announcements in terms of huge changes, especially at the outset. that we're making to the program at this time. But again, we always appreciate your feedback, especially as we get Score Buddy kind of set up and get everybody onto that. We will love to hear feedback about that. I know there are going to be just some, announcements soon just about making sure that folks feel like they're getting checked in with on a more regular basis, and getting some more data just on a monthly basis, both about overall kind of just stats for the center for telephony and QA, as well as kind of some personal, your individual information, and then also quarterly check-ins and all of that. But I think we'll have more details about that as we start rolling this out. The really important thing to me is just starting to get Stan familiarized with scoring the calls now that he's trained so much on 211, and starting to get some information in the new system, start to give staff some visibility back into quality assurance, so we can also start using some of that data to also see where we need to provide some more support and help and training. And so yeah, so nothing major and nothing like scary, just new, great, awesome new specialist, and hopefully awesome new software that will be a lot better than Exam. And I also added what I showed the last group too, was that I added the QA, that guide, which I know right now is the full guide's not in Exam, and the full guide's not yet in Score Buddy, but I did put it up on that 211oh.org, the staff page. Actually, the HC staff pointed out that they wanted to have a PDF of that available without having to print it or like keep it on their desktop, so I threw a link to it in there. So you can actually access that from there now as well. So that was just a little thing that I did. So if anyone's like, oh wait, what do we want us to review those metrics before we start getting into QA? And that's the other thing I had said. The first group kind of asked, oh, are we going to have some trainings for Score Buddy to familiarize people with the software? And I, definitely intend to send some decent information out. Just, along with those logins, it isn't just here's a username and password. What I'm kind of more interested in doing is just reviewing some of this again, and just, providing some refreshers and training on how how calls are being chosen, how they're being evaluated. I know a lot of people had said they wanted to revisit the weighting of some of the components. And I think, this would be a good time to look at some of that. So that's where I want to spend actually some time, either with small groups or maybe in a webinar setting. I'm not sure yet. But that's what I would anticipate over the coming months, is some more conversations around those things. Well, that's cool. Questions? No? Does anyone have, I guess, any questions about some of what Molly reviewed?
I actually have a question. This is Latoya. Just because I see the Cleveland Tenants thing on there. So since the Cleveland Tenants organization closed and legal aid is doing some of that, I've had a lot of callers say that they're not doing that. Any idea of exactly what they're doing with those callers who have problems with their landlords and things like that?
This is Louise. I can actually answer that. Under legal aid, what formerly was Cleveland Tenants landlord-tenant phone line, it has the same phone number It's not the same number as legal aid, and it's in refer this way. So it should be basically still providing what the what Cleveland Tenant's landlord tenant information was providing. And if it's not, I would want to know that so I can contact legal aid. If you have specifics about it, that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah, it's just because what I usually advise them to do is a lot of times they're thinking that they can just put the rent in escrow and or just not pay the rent. And I thought that legal aid would kind of give them the template that the Cleveland Tenants Organization would use and, you know, help them along in that process. Yeah, the 861 number. Yeah, they're telling me that they're just not doing anything. They can't help them.
Well, if you have specifics about that, that would be helpful, because I just call. If I'm going to talk to legal aid, I need to know exactly what's not happening.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can't remember.
Unless other people have had the same experience.
Okay. Well, I will be sure to make note of that if I get another one of those calls. So they're supposed to be doing basically the same thing, right? It's a whole different part.
Yeah.
Okay.
My experience with that, this is Janice, is that they will, callers have let me know or have said that legal aid has told them they don't have the funding to assist them.
So when they call that number, 861-5955, legal aid says we don't have the money to help with this?
Yeah, that's what I got.
Okay. Yeah, if you have specifics, you can send a transmittal to 211 updates and it'll get to me.
Okay.
That way, anything specific would be helpful.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'm sorry if I've missed this already, but when are we starting the QA scoring again?
May. Stan's going to start for the month of May. Scoring, and we're going to try to start out at the same volume, that we had been doing, which was 5 for every full-time staff member, and then 3 to 4 depending on the hours worked. It's just interesting. We're still trying to work on a process with the new software, though. The one difference between Exam and Score Buddy is that Exam, we had all of those recordings just FTPing directly to Exam because we had kind of unlimited storage with them. We do not have unlimited data storage with Score Buddy, which means that Stan will have to actually manage the process of manually selecting calls from In Contact probably to download and then upload into the Score Buddy software again manually, which is again going to it was certainly initially kind of increase the time taken because there's definitely an extra step required. But we're going to start scoring again in May, and then, like I said, once we have a month or two of that in there, and Stan's kind of worked through his process, certainly by the beginning of fiscal July 1, we'll have a much firmer plan in place, for going forward. But hopefully we'll have some information available to folks again, and be able to provide some support around QA in May.
Okay. One more question. I'm sorry. This is LaToya. So the lethality assessment, is that with the chats too? Because I had one today and I didn't see that. And I've never done that. So I'm telling on myself. But I didn't know that we had to do that for every call, for every problem gambling call. Hello? Molly?
Hello? Okay, I'm sorry. Initially when we, I accidentally muted myself. Okay, so initially when we had started the project, it wasn't really stressed in the training, but this is something that they've reached out to us and asked us to add this as something that we're offering to our callers. So, you know, it just wasn't stressed that we should be doing this with every single call. And now they've made it very clear with us that that's something that they want us to begin doing. So moving forward, we're going to make sure that we ask all of our callers if they're thinking about suicide.
Okay, so do we ask in the chats as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ask in the chats as well. Yep.
Okay. Have you added that to like one of the little
you know what? I have not, but I'm glad you brought that up. I will do that. So I'll make a note to add that.
All right.
Replies.
Thank you.
And just so that I'm clear, Molly, we actually do this lethality assessment for the people who are calling for someone who has a problem gambling issue?
Yeah, we'll be asking that for the loved ones as well. Now, I think you can kind of, you know, if this isn't a professional that's calling for their client, you'd probably want to frame it as, you know, asking for the client, like, okay, is this causing them so much stress that they're feeling suicidal? And offering them that connection to a suicide prevention hotline. But if this is like, say, the person's spouse or a parent or the adult child of this individual, it's very incredibly stressful to have a close relationship with someone who is a problem gambler. You know, like for example, if your spouse has a problem with gambling, chances are that gambling is seriously affecting you as well, and putting you under a lot of stress and pressure to, you know, to make ends meet because all the budget is going out to gambling, and you're trying to figure out, how do I make the mortgage payment? How do I keep the utilities on? How do I feed the kids? So that amount of stress could also lead to having suicidal thoughts. So, so we do want to address that with the loved ones as well.
Or homicidal.
Yeah, true.
And I'm sorry, did you guys say at the beginning of all this that we cannot close out of a problem gambling call if we do not ask and complete that lethality assessment? Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. So that just changed as of today. Now, that being said, you know, if somebody's calling to find out the winning lottery numbers or find out what's on the buffet,
right.
There's this first question: does the call relate to problem gambling? Yes or no? So, I mean, you can get around.
That's what thanks, Molly. That's what I needed to see. Right. How to get through those. Okay. Okay, cool.
So you don't have to ask that person that wants the winning lot to know what the winning lottery numbers were if they're feeling suicidal, because hopefully not winning does not make them want to kill themselves.
Well, sometimes the answer asking that question can plant the seed in a person's mind, but I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.
No, asking the question does not make, and actually we talked about that in the QPR training that we went to, that asking a person if they're feeling suicidal is not going to make them any more likely to follow through with a suicide plan. So it's not like, oh gosh, I didn't think about that before. I think maybe I'm going to like look into that option. So that's not going to happen. So don't worry about that.
I'm not worried at all. Thank you, Molly.
All right. Okay. Anybody else have any other comments, questions, concerns before we wrap this up? Okay. All right. Great. Well, then we'll end a few minutes early here. Thanks everybody for logging in and participating. And I sent out just a little bit ago a Survey Monkey. If you could fill that out when you log out of the webinar. It should only take you like less than a minute to complete it. So if you want to use those few minutes that you have before you're scheduled to be back on the phones, that would be an awesome use of that time, and I would really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Molly.
All right, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
All right, thank you.